Welcome to the Nymph Evolution French Nymphing Cast Masterclass. French Nymphing Cast is just a 5-second long movement, but you will see that it's full of very important details. Before entering the technical topic of the French Nymphing Cast, what we will do is that I will explain to you the signature nymphing of Nymph Evolution, which is always optimal and minimal. Step 0, even before step 1, to master the French nymphing cast, you must know the weight of your nymph collection. I will use instead the word ballast of weight. You will often hear me saying that because weight is just a numeric number. We are speaking about ballast, about the sensation of weight in the rod. It's really important. Why do I tell you that? If you start French nymphing without knowing the ballast of your nymphs, you won't be able to propel. French nymphing cast is all about propelling, and for me, in my nymphing range, between a very light tungsten pheasant tail like this and a heavy ceramic nymph with tungsten and lead, it's a huge difference. I'm not at all practicing the same cast by doing a cast with a very light nymph or a very dense nymph. And it's even more important with the nymph evolution method because I use small nymphs with a very high density. That's really important because you will propel them well. So there will be a full masterclass about nymph weight, the good fly box, the nymph collection. We will now speak about the cast, but keep in mind that you must know the feeling of weight on your rod to practice the best French nymphing cast. step 1 on your French nymphing cast is to assess the spot and to take out the appropriate length of line. Not too much, not enough. You must take out the good length, and it totally depends if you're on a very small river or on a very large one. You can also do bow cast, and we will see that later. So this is the first step. If you prepare the good length of line, then you already anticipate the perfect cast, which must be the optimal cast. What we want in a French nymphing cast is to have the longest cast as possible, to have the longest drift as possible. If you aim for long drifts, you will have more bites. That's the point. You must have long drifts with the nymph drifting as close to the bottom as possible. That's the main point. So on this step 1, if you have a too short line out, your cast will be really short and you will be dragging really fast. That's not good. If you have too much line out, your line will be totally loose on the water and you won't get the good drift. So it starts here. You see the detail? And a very good angler knows exactly to assess which line he must take out. In the case of very large river with no problem of casting, you can take out a lot of line without thinking about that. But in medium small rivers with trees and branches, then you must assess correctly the good line to whip and to eject the maximum of line to have an optimal cast. Step 2, when you have assessed the good line out, then you will load the blank of the rod with the weight of your nymph. And now I come back to what we said in step 0. Knowing the weight of your nymph, the ballast, the density, you will be able to put the good amount of force to propel the nymph. And also knowing the type of nymph. Because if you have, like me, ceramic nymphs that are really dense, they propel like bullets, literally. They are high density. If you have like hairy nymphs like shrimps or art here, it's different because it does not have this density. Ceramics are also a good point because they propel like bullets. So it's really important for you to understand that the action of the rod, the blank, is taking the energy from your wrist here and allows you to propel. There's no classical cast like in dry fly fishing. You don't have a flying line to help you. This is the density of your nymph that will allow you to cast with only nylon in the ring like we do in modern nymphing. And also, you understood me, the heavier the nymph is, the easier the cast is. And the lighter the nymph is, the harder the cast is. Step 3, propel the nymph. Then you gave the power to your blank. The nymphs are out in the air. Most of the time I fish with 2 nymphs. We will also speak about that in another masterclass. And now you must reach your target under the branch, grayling feeding vein. This is also part of the game to be able to target a very precise place when loading the rod. Step 4 is really important. It took me years to understand that. I repeat this process every time. At every cast, I extend a maximum of flat banner, which means that at every cast, I want my full line out to be straight a line. It must be like a straight line. This is really important for me because you will see after it allows me to assess the time of the nymph dropping in the water and to have a regular process that I repeat. So every cast I try to have the totality of my line out completely aligned straightly on the water. Also, it shows me that I made the optimal cast and that I'm really far away. You must keep in mind one point. When French nymphing, Czech nymphing, modern nymphing with only nylon in the rings, you are not too discreet. You cannot cast with a fly line far away at 10, 20, 25 meters. That's not the case. You are on repetitive cast and you must hide yourself most of the time. So that's a critical point to do the cast as far as possible. You must make sure that every cast is made as far as possible for the long drift and to hide you from the trouts mainly, because the grainings are more okay with the discretion. But make sure that you make the longest cast as possible because you will take more fish. That's why if you don't have a fully aligned straight line on the water, if your line is loose on the water when you have propelled the nymph, then you haven't used the best of your line out. You understand? You must have, this is really important, and I insist on this point on video, the whole line must be straightly aligned before starting the drift. For me, that's a really important point, and that's a process. It's a milestone for me in the cast. When my line is totally straight, then I can start lifting up and drifting. Believe me, this is a really important point because this is a milestone. If you repeat this process every time, you will do better cast. You must be like a robot, an automatic robot that is performing optimal cast every time to get focused on everything. On the fish, on the water, on the next good vein, on where do I walk in the water. Your cast must be automatized to have your brain available for all the good elements of nymphing. Step 5. This is another crucial, really important point. Listen to me. You must operate a time of descent of the nymph. This is really important because if you wait randomly before start your drift, you will never know if your nymph is close from the bottom or not. And the goal is always to have the nymph drifting as close as possible from the bottom. Again, that's why I fish with high density nymph. I must fish every time very, very close from the bottom. That's a really important point. So why did I tell you in step 0, know the weight of your nymph and the ballast and look at them how they sink in the water? Because at this very precise point, when you operate a time of descent of the nymph, you must know when to start your drift. If you start drifting too late, your nymph will be dragging on the bottom on the rocks, and if you start too early, you must be dragging. So this step 5, when do I lift up the rod according to the time of descent of the nymph, is critical. And again, it's according to the type of nymph you use. If you use hairy nymphs, we don't love that too much the last years in France. Hairy nymph, we love more ceramics and perdigons because they sink really fast and they allow you to make longer drift. They are less realistic in a way, but they allow you to make longer drift because they are smooth and they go down fast. But still you have to know when to lift up the rod to know when the nymph is close from the bottom. Me, after 10 years of practice of my own collection, you can put me on any river, I make the cast, I have the line right, and I know when to lift up to get the perfect drift, to have the nymph drifting close from the bottom. Time of descent of the nymph before lifting of the rod is crucial because a French nymphing cast is not long, so it's a story of seconds, you know. You must be really accurate in the time you lift up the rod to get the nymph. And the deeper the stream is, the longer you will wait before lifting up the rod and taking control of the nymph. Sometimes in very shallow river, you just take the control really fast because the water is shallow. But if it's deep, sometimes in deep pools, I can wait 1 to 3 seconds that the nymph is sinking at the good height, and then I take control. So keep in mind this step 5, the good time before taking control of the line is crucial, because you will drift too close from the bottom or you will drag if you don't do that. Keep in mind, work on that. Try some blind drift, some useless drift on the river to make sure you get close from the bottom. The next question is, Stan, how do I know if I'm close from the bottom or not? Generally, you must sometimes get hooked on the bottom when you practice a good nymphing. If you never hook the bottom, that's not a good sign. You are drifting too high on the water. That's also why I fish with 2 nymphs, because 2 nymphs on the line equals double quantity of fish on the net. That's my point of view. I will explain you that in another masterclass. Step 6, taking contact with the nymph, which means starting the drift. It's linked to the step 5. The contact can be really fast in low water. You can lift up the nylon stop indicator really fast. So this step 6 is basically just putting the nylon stop indicator in the drift over the surface. It's also linked to the step 5. You must know how fast your nymph will sink and then adapt your control take to start the drift. So step 6 is taking control of the drift. Step 7, assessing the water height with the nylon indicator. It's also really important. Most of the time, I keep my nylon stop indicator from 5 to 10 centimeters above the surface. Then I lock a method, and it's really important to repeat it like a robot, I told you. But you must assess, and if sometimes you have a lot of tippets, you can take the indicator up from the surface. And if you are really short on your line, you can get your indicator close from the surface. So you have a game of 10-30 centimeters of the nylon stop moving over the surface to allow you to assess your line deep into the water to make sure that you are drifting at the good level. That's why the nylon stop indicator is your life. It's showing you how you behave on the drift. This very small orange point is really important for your drift. Step 8, the most simple of the cast, drifting naturally. Why is it simple? In the previous steps, you really had to calculate many things. Drifting naturally is just copying the river. So you just go with the flow. That's exactly the action to do. You try to follow with your nylon stop indicator the rhythm, the pace of the flow. This is really simple in a way, because you just have to copy the river, and to do the good rhythm, be inside the river with your head, feel the stream, and then make copy-paste drift from what the river is doing. An important point, sometimes the stream is different from the bottom to the top. Sometimes the stream is not regular in all the water column. That's a fact, I agree, but it's really technical. We won't speak about that now. If you apply this method, you have a chance to fish like 90% of the river on Earth. So be sure that it's no problem if you copy-paste the water paste. With this method, you will drift naturally. So this is a really easy step. Copy the river and then drift. But you must understand it's because you made all these small steps before that you're allowed to just breathe and drift naturally. Because you have calculated everything, because you have an island stop indicator, because you put the good length of tippets, because you know the weight of your nymph, because you have seen your nymph, how they sink in the water, because you are sure that your nymph is drifting close from the bottom. Because of all the work you made in the steps before, you can drift naturally. If you bring a random nymph like this with a random indicator and you drift naturally, this is not nymphing, because you're not sure drifting close from the bottom. Are you sure you are using the good pattern? Are you sure your line is not on the bottom? Are you sure you're not dragging? With the method I propose you, in the first steps, you lock some clues that will tell you that you are drifting naturally and close from the bottom. Keep in mind that the key of the success in nymphing is to drift close from the bottom. Fish are lazy, they don't waste energy like this. If a nymph is drifting up in the water column, most of the time they won't move. You must bring the nymph in their mouth. It's really important. So step 8, just drift naturally. Step 9 is same as step 8, but in another approach, I would say do not drag. It's complementary word to drift naturally and to not drag, so you must put your brains in the two ways. Okay, I'm like the river, and on the other side, okay, I'm not dragging. Try to to imagine your nymph under the water according to what you feel in your rod. Your nymph must be like a perfect puppet imitating a caddis or a pheasant tail, drifting at the pace of the river. Do not drag them. That's the worst case. It's even better to have a line that is too loose, because the nymph will be more natural, than to have them really tight and dragged and to go faster than the current. It's always worse to drag faster than the current than to have the nymph loose on the bottom. But you understood me, the best point is always to have a balance. Nymphing is often, most of the time, a compromise. The extremes are not good in nymphing. It's like in life. Nymphing is most of the time about an equilibrium between what you see and what the river is bringing to you. Step 10. Now you are installed, you're cool, you're with your cigarettes like this on the water, there's some birds hanging around, you're drifting naturally. You're not dragging, your drift is on its way, it's all good. You must now be aware of the weak signals. Why do I say the weak signals? Because we fish for very educated fish in Europe. In England, in France, in Spain, in Bosnia, in Switzerland, in Germany, we fish for educated fish. If you go in Lapland, Sweden, if you go in Alaska, if you go in Mongolia, they are really rough fish. They will jump on your nymph. You don't have to wait for a weak signal. They will blast the rod out of your hands. In our classic modern nymphing in Europe, graylings and trouts are really eager to speed the nymphs really close. So when you're drifting naturally, any small clue, any doubt you have, just strike, you know. And that's why I will speak about it in another masterclass. I use carbon handle rods because they are really cold and simple and blank. It's giving you straight the clues of a bite in nymphing. On the other way, carbon handles are not the best for dry fly because you need living cork, it's better. But for me, to detect the bites and to have a perfect control and contact with the nymph, I prefer the carbon handles. Step 11, your drift is over. There's no more to drift because it's dragging, it's downstream of you. There's one last step, one last chance to take a fish, and then you must know about biology of the insects, about entomology. All the insects living on the bottom of the water, you know that, are rising from a nymph shape to be an imago shape, a perfect dry fly that will fly away to get the eggs back on the water. This is called the emerging phase. You have the advantage when French nymphing to do a final teasing. So that's my method. Any place I'm fishing, any cast, I always do a final teasing like this. You can see it on the video to try to get a fish that maybe will jump on this emerging nymph. It costs nothing. It takes 1 second to do a final teasing on every cast, and you will improve again the fish you will have per day. Step 12, your drift is over. You just have to reload the blank and to cast again and repeat again and again the same process. There's an important point here. To reload the blank, guess what? Again, you must know the ballast of your nymph because you will load the rod according to a nymph that is pressurized by the water. You totally understand what I'm saying. You have the nymph downstream, the water is pressurizing it, and like a rebound, you can recast again and reload the rod. And this is a tip. You will use the water pressure on the nymph to propel again your nymph. That's a trick that you can do only with your nymph downstream. So that's the last step of the French nymphing cast. You made all the cycle, you repeat it, and it's all good. Like a robot, you will repeat it anytime to get focused on the ton of subjects we will see in other masterclasses.